everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the first Books Beside My Bed video for 2023. This is my reading week from the 1st until the 6th of January, so these are all the books that I read at the start of the year. I am going to be talking about 9 things that I read this week, but that does not include this stack of books, which will all feature in various videos coming out over the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned. These are other projects that are ongoing. Although I will say, if you want to hear about me reading the Bad Guys series, you're going to need to follow Little Bookish Teacher, which is my kids channel, because this is really fun. But let's start getting into the reviews. I do actually have a couple of kids titles that I did want to mention in this video. One is a review copy that is a book that's coming out this week on the 10th of January here in Australia. That is found in Sydney by Joanne O'Callaghan and illustrated by Koori. This is a counting adventure book, and there is a Melbourne version, and I will have a review of both of them up on Little Bookish Teacher this week as well, but I wanted to share it here because I did receive it from Ellen and Unwin, so thank you very much to them. And this is a gorgeous counting book that basically takes you around all the major landmarks in Sydney. So from Taronga Zoo to Bondi Beach to the Opera House to the Sydney Harbour Bridge, on every page there is something to count and to see, and you get taken on this beautiful journey of the amazing things that Sydney has to offer. I love the illustrations in this. It's absolutely beautiful. It'd be a fun one for kids who are just learning to count, but also for any type of project where you are learning about a new place. Also very cool is at the back of the book you have a map that has all of the different places that you visited in the story, so you can actually see where they are in relation to everything else. And it also has some facts about those places and landmarks, so you also have the opportunity to learn something new as well. This was really fun. Thank you very much to Ellen and Unwin for sending this to me. I greatly appreciated it. I also read Koori Princess by Anita Heiss, or Dr. Anita Heiss. This is a junior fiction story about a little girl called Tish who loves Disney princesses. Like, she is obsessed with the movies. It's all she talks about. She loves dressing up as them, and her older siblings and cousins kind of tease her about this, mostly because, as one of the conversations she has with her mum goes, Australia's First Nations people don't actually have a concept for princess or even royalty because it's not, they don't even have a word for it because it's not part of their culture. So this book has some really great discussions around culture, around having big dreams, and Tish knows that, you know, she's not going to grow up and become a princess, but that doesn't mean she can't be strong and fierce and stand up for herself and have those big dreams, which I love. So she's 7 turning 8 in this book. It's a gorgeous little story, well worth checking out. And then a middle grade title I read was My Brother Ben by Peter Canarvas. I've read many of his picture books. I've also read The Elephant, which was a book that came out a couple of years ago. This is a story of brotherhood. It is about Luke, who idolizes his big brother Ben. Over the summer holidays one year, there's this competition in town to win their very own boat because they live along the river. And Ben and Luke decide they're going to enter this competition. Luke is obsessed with birds and wildlife, and so they decide to create a guide to the bird life of the local area. But of course, Ben is growing up. He's going off to high school, and there's a 2-year age difference between Luke and Ben. And over the summer, they find that they start to grow apart in some ways. Luke doesn't really know what to do with that. So this book explores this summer that they spend together, and the fact that despite the fact they might be going to different schools, they're still brothers, and that is hugely important in their lives. Beautifully written story. Then I started picking up books off my KU TBR because obviously I'm participating in Read What You Own, so I'm trying to work my way through my physical books and my Kindle Unlimited TBR. And I started off with Shameless Puckboys by Eden, Finley and Saxon James. This is the third book in the Puckboy series. These are hockey romances. This one in particular is about Oscar, who's known for having some very public sexcapades, and finally the PR manager, Lane, has had enough. He has put all of his people on it, and Oscar still can't fall in line, and so Lane decides to basically shadow him and turns himself into Oscar's babysitter for the majority of this book, which Oscar can't believe because Lane suddenly moves in with him, and Oscar is determined to break Lane. It's a fun and silly series, and I actually really like the interplay between Oscar and Lane. Oscar thinks Lane is kind of stuffy, but he's determined to draw him out. But Lane is not like that at all. He's just professional. And so this is a bit of a workplace romance, and there are some dramas surrounding that towards the end. But what I did like about it is that the longer we spent with these characters, the more we realized that Oscar is not just this affable playboy. There is some depth to him, and as he and Lane get to know one another, that comes out, and I appreciated that greatly. I also read Killing Sarai by J.A. Redmerski, which was a recommendation from Megan from Meowth Beta. I've honestly had this sitting on my KU shelf for months, and I had every intention of reading it, and then I kept talking myself out of it because I wasn't convinced that I was going to enjoy it. But I did. Like, it's not going to be up there with my favorites, but it's certainly one that I was able to sit and read for a significant period of time. So this is a dark romance between an assassin and a woman who ends up talking him into helping her escape her situations. So Sarai is a prisoner of a drug cartel leader. She happens to overhear Victor when he has been hired by her captor and sees this as an opportunity to escape because she recognizes that Victor is American, or so she thinks. And so she finds a way into his car and holds him at gunpoint while he drives her out of the compound. Now, she is never really quite in control of the situation, and Victor often lets her think that she is, up until a certain point. Eventually, she kind of wears Victor down because despite the fact that he is an assassin for hire, he does still have a bit of a moral compass, and he can't quite stomach the thought of her going back to her situation. What I will say, there's a bit of a slow start as these two sort of end up in the position where they have this very interesting dynamic. Like, that is in the last third of the book, and I kind of wish the characters had been fleshed out a little bit more, and I wonder if in the second book that happens. But what I did like is how Sarai went from one thing to another, and how it did explore this idea of, did she get out before that life changed her irreparably, and having some really interesting implications, I think, for future books. So I am curious to see what happens. I may pick up the second book at some point. So this was an interesting read, definitely outside my comfort zone. Then something a little bit different, I read a zine. This is Whalebone, Whalefall by Holly Exley. She has a YouTube channel. I actually saw this in one of her videos, the making of it, and I really wanted to support her. So I did pick it up, and this is a really interesting exploration of the impact of whales on the environment. So it is a gorgeous little zine. I love zines. I used to make them as well, but I haven't read one in ages, so I'm glad that I did. I also read Headstrong by Eden Finley. So this is another hockey romance, sort of. One of the characters, Whit, is a 22-year-old hockey player. He plays for a college team, and he doesn't really plan on playing professionally. He's just enjoying it in college. He has dreams of helping out his brother on their family's farm. But he is recently out, and he is determined to experience all of those first things. First date, first kiss, first sexual experience, etc. And he goes out to the wine bar in a bookstore, Vino and Veritas, and he strikes out because he's this really bubbly character and he has a tendency to blurt out everything that he's thinking, so he overwhelms people quite a bit. And he ends up chatting to the bartender, whose name is Rain, and Rain is straight, or so he thought, but for the majority of the book he's convinced. But he's also not had very much success in his relationships up to this point, and he and Whit become really, really close friends. They spend a lot of time together, despite the fact that Rain has initial apprehension about that because Whit is a hockey player, and Rain had been a hockey player at the same college and had quite a good reputation, but an injury basically took out any chance of him ever playing professionally, and he's still dealing with a lot of the trauma and disappointment for that. Whit is determined to help Rain remember his love of hockey and the fact that, you know, just because he can't play professionally doesn't mean he can't be involved in the sport at all. Along the lines, feelings begin to develop. And I did like the discussions around Rain figuring out his preferences and understanding himself a little bit more. And honestly, these two were just very, very cute. Then I read a short story, which is a prequel to a Why Choose Hockey romance that's coming out later this year by Emily Rath. And the short story is called That One Night. And this is an MF story. It is about Rachel Price, who is a doctor, and she has been trying to get into sports medicine and like a fellowship where she can work with professional athletes, but she's been rejected. And that's where we open up. She's in a bar drowning her sorrows. She's been in town for her brother's wedding, but she's blown off the breakfast brunch the next day because she's just so disappointed that she hasn't got this position. And she's being hit on by this guy who cannot see that she is not interested. And when he gets a little bit too handsy, this mystery guy comes and helps her out. His name is Jake. She recognizes that he is in some kind of sport, but they agree not to share names and not to share where they work because they hit it off straight away. And they agree to a one-night stand. and it is hot and steamy and just glorious. Like, their chemistry was off the charts, and I cannot wait to see where this story goes, especially since I know it's going to morph into a Waichu story. And then the final book that I read this week for this wrap up is Clean Sweep by Ilona Andrews. This is the first book in Innkeeper Chronicles series. We do have a read along for this, and we have a live show coming up in a couple of weeks. I will be doing another reread of this either this coming week or the following week before the live show, where I'll be listening to the graphic audio. So I will talk about the graphic audio then. But this was my second read through of Clean Sweep, and I'd forgotten how just delightfully fun this urban fantasy sci-fi story with a little bit of a hint of romance in there played out. I mean, it was just entirely delightful. You have Dina, who is an innkeeper, and she basically heads up a magical bed and breakfast inn called Gertrude Hunt. On Earth, the inns are magical way stations for travelers, and the innkeeper basically has the ability to access a significant amount of magic while on the grounds and while inside the inn. And the inn is sentient to a point, and there's a little bit of discussion around not knowing exactly how sentient the house is, but the house reacts to Dina's emotions and responds to her commands. And at the beginning of this book, animals in the neighborhood are being violently killed. Dina has recognized that there is this guy in town, Sean. She knows that he is a werewolf. He doesn't know that she's an innkeeper. As it turns out, he has no idea of the magical world. A lot of it, that stuff's been kept from him. She basically calls him out and tells him to deal with it because he's been marking his territory, but he's letting something come in and kill animals in his territory. But before Sean can do anything, Dina ends up spotting one of these creatures, which is horrifying and gross, and she ends up killing it and bringing it back to the grounds of the inn. And Sean figures this out and is furious because he was going to do it, and he thinks that she is helpless, and she proves him very wrong, which is hilarious. And as it turns out, this creature is linked to another being that is on Earth that also draws the attention of the vampires. In this world, werewolves and vampires are actually aliens, and we learn quite a bit about their histories in this because Dina and Sean end up helping a vampire who's been injured in an attack, and that's when they meet Arland, who is another significant character in this series and does have his own book later on. I just thoroughly enjoyed this from start to finish. It made me smile, it made me laugh. I'd totally forgotten about the permanent in-guest Caldenia, who is hilarious and terrifying. And that's not even mentioning Beast, who is Dina's little dog, or is she? Like, this is just delightful. I'm actually really looking forward to my reread with the graphic audio. So that is my wrap up for this week. In the comments, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books or if you're planning on picking any of them up. If you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave any kind of hockey emoji down below, since I've been going through the hockey books this week. It's a thing. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.